Hello and welcome to this webinar, which forms part of the New Model Business Academy's Professional Development Programme for 2016. In order to complement the comprehensive face-to-face events programme, NMBA will be hosting a number of webinars throughout the year which are designed to assist financial advice professionals with the application of their advice. NMBA has created a professional development framework which not only includes technical knowledge but also covers conduct and ethics, business development, practice management and personal development, all which should form part of an individual's annual development programme. Each of the NMBA webinars for 2016 will cover at least one of these areas, therefore providing a wide range of varied content for members to use for their annual personal development. As the content of these webinars is designed to support the application of advice rather than being purely educational, it can be used for unstructured CPD if required. The title of this webinar is Retirement, Vulnerability in the System. I'm Tom Hegarty, Managing Director of NMBA, and I'm joined by Martin Lines from Partnership. When it comes to retirement, most people have welcomed the freedom to choose how they take their benefits. We do not live in a one-size-fits-all society, and understanding a client's objectives is a serious key to providing good outcomes specific to each individual. With no default option, many clients could remain invested for many years to come. At the same time, care funding remains a key focus for government attention and a key area for advice. The need to plan for a period where personal funding may be the only viable option has to be accounted for. But wherever the client is in the retirement journey, the ability to make decisions where there could be specific barriers for those in later life must be considered. This session focuses on the FCA's research on vulnerable clients. What has been identified as the risks? How can advisors ensure that they're taking appropriate steps to consider the issues raised? By viewing this session, advisors will be able to understand the additional considerations when advising vulnerable clients, consider any procedural changes that may be needed in light of an ageing population, explore the learning points from the FCA's research on vulnerable clients and the impact on later life advice, and identify how product solutions can provide good consumer outcomes. Martin has been in the financial services profession for over 28 years, working with local, regional and national IFA firms. Coming from a pension specialist background, Martin joined Partnership in 2009 to focus on the retirement market and has been delivering face-to-face workshops and online webinars on pensions and retirement-related subjects. He now heads up a team of specialist business development managers working with advisors across the UK. Okay, Martin, I'm going to hand it across to you.
Great, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Tom, and welcome everyone. Just had my welcome to Tom's there. And the session we're going to look at this afternoon has been explained: retirement advice, vulnerability in the system. I think we can all agree that the news around freedom and choice is fantastic. People are really grasping all of the different options that are available to them now that the legislation has been passed. What a fantastic opportunity for advisors to really get to grips with the sorts of new products and availability of options that can really produce great outcomes for clients. But of course the phrase freedom and choice is particularly good if that individual has the freedom to choose. And it seems to me that with a lack of default options in retirement and people perhaps being invested until the end of that retirement period, maybe there will be a point at some place in the future for many of those clients to have someone to help them to make those decisions, a substituted decision maker if you like. But we're going to focus today on the vulnerable clients paper that the FCA have produced. And we have another webinar alongside this one around the power of attorney and some of the things that can help. But in this session, we'll just focus on the areas that Tom has mentioned. What is meant by this term vulnerable clients, and what are the additional considerations that we need to consider? You may learn from this session or start to think about some procedural changes that you might need to put in place in the light of an ageing population. There's been another discussion paper, DP 16.1, that has come out from the FCA, giving a lot of expert views in that particular area. So we'll have a look at the key points from the FCA's research on vulnerable clients and the impact that might have not just on a later life advice service, but on a retirement service too. And as Tom said, we'll identify how product solutions can be used to provide good consumer outcomes. Well, I thought I'd start today with a little bit of culture. given the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death, and 'tis our fast intent to shake all cares and business from our age, conferring them on younger strengths. What a vision of pension freedom and choice, being able to put in the past the stresses of the workplace and get onto this perhaps a third of an individual's lifetime without such cares as have been in the past. The phrase does go on to say, as we crawl on burden to our death, but nevertheless, what we're talking about here is potentially quite a long time frame. And hey presto, 400 years later, April 2015, we have this new freedom and choice in terms of how to use pension benefits. Now, of course, freedom, responsibility that have been passed over to individuals isn't necessarily the same as knowledge. And of course, what clients have now been faced with, or consumers have been faced with, is this real responsibility to take care of their retirement journey. And of course, the hope is that they'll seek the relevant information and preferably regulated advice from people like yourselves. But where they don't, does that really heighten the degree of vulnerability that individuals may have as they enter retirement? One of the most complex sets of decisions perhaps that somebody is going to make. And the FCA have had a lot to say about vulnerable clients. Let's just look at their definition of vulnerable clients from the Consumer Vulnerability paper from February 2015. According to the FCA, a vulnerable person is someone who, due to personal circumstances, is especially susceptible to detriment, particularly when a firm is not acting with appropriate levels of care. Now, of course, many people have sort of pigeonholed this into sort of later life market because you know, we think of elderly clients, perhaps those going into care or accessing equity release, and the extra considerations that need to be made around that particular juncture. But what this paper does point out is that it's not just the elderly who are vulnerable, although oftentimes they will form part of this sort of vulnerable clients area. So let's have a look at what the wider context of this paper before we look specifically at the aging population. This paper brings out a number of points around the consumers in the UK and the challenges that people are facing financially, and of course the help they need from financial institutions, advisors, providers and the like. The first thing is, just as a bit of background, almost half of adults do not have enough savings to cover an unexpected bill of £300 according to the Money Advice Service. Now that's very worrying. What does it tell us about UK savings, you know, and the need to make sure people put money by in case of emergencies? What does it tell us about pressure on people's income around this particular area? You know, what's the rule of thumb in terms of how much savings or how much savings people should have? You know, I can remember hearing things about, you know, 3 times net monthly income, these type of ideas, and yet look at the situation almost half of individuals are in. No wonder that where there isn't savings involved and an emergency comes along, you know, there are other sources of loans and these type of things, often at very high interest rates that people go towards. Arguably, providers, companies that almost target vulnerable clients in that particular sense. So that tells us a lot about UK savings. And the other aspect of this is, in terms of people's understanding of their finances, is that just under half of UK adults have a numeracy attainment age of 11 or below. Now consider some of the decisions, the important decisions that people have been given responsibility for in terms of their retirement options, for example, and perhaps arguably some very large decisions that have been made recently. Do people understand the economic sort of output of the decisions that they're making, the implications for the future, particularly when it comes to things like the retirement journey? And then, of course, there's the health issue. It's not just numeracy that can put people in a vulnerable situation, the understanding of economics and their own economic situation, but ill health. Every 2 minutes, someone in the UK is diagnosed with cancer, and I'm sure many of us can relate to that and know people that have been affected by that particular scenario. And all of this, of course, particularly when it comes to things like ill health, can create what's called a financial shock. And OP8, you know, really identifies that many people can suffer one of these financial shocks. In fact, over a third of adults have experienced one in the last 3 years. An unexpected shock to their finances. Did they have savings in place? Did they have some plans in place to ensure that should the worst happen to their finances, there was some kind of a safety net? Many people did not. How do those shocks happen? Well, 21% experienced a large drop in income through loss of a job, change in hours, or separation. So divorce, separation, and the sort of implications that has on one's finances can be quite devastating. Sudden health problems we've mentioned in terms of cancer. And one of the issues here, of course, is that if you have somebody who does suffer from a health problem, often they'll need extra care. And you get this knock-on effect, this domino effect, whereby those people that are then designated as carers for that individual, whereas officially or unofficially, then perhaps become vulnerable themselves. And of course you've got bereavement, the impact of losing a loved one, and really the change in circumstances which can make people view their finances or their decisions in a different way perhaps than they would ordinarily do. Now, we said that this doesn't necessarily just impact on those of sort of the aging population, but let's just focus on that for a moment, because in 2009 a paper came out, Just Aging, that highlighted vulnerability for elderly people. It spoke about how paid work throughout the working life is not enough to ensure an escape from poverty in old age. And the proportion of the working life spent in paid work is virtually immaterial to the chances of being in poverty in later life. Perhaps a lot of this, of course, particularly now with pension freedoms, is simply underestimating how long later life actually is, and the vulnerability that people may face in terms of judging how to produce a sustainable income over what period of time can cause these issues whereby there's a significant chance of funds running out, causing this poverty scenario. And the most common and significant trigger, of course, loss of a spouse. Particularly for women, that's just the way that pension provision has worked in years gone by. But nevertheless, that I'm sure teaches us a lot about death benefits under drawdown, annuity, whatever it might be, and the need to include something around that. Particularly now that you've got that extra flexibility that's been brought into the system. What else does it tell us about things like whole-of-life plans? We talk about second death whole-of-life plans, about first death, and making sure these individuals are provided for. Going back to the occasional paper 8, and building on what the learning points are and the concerns that the FCA has around this, they are as follows. Here are the key issues. When it comes to making sure that a service is available for those individuals that may feel vulnerable for the various reasons that we've discussed, what the paper finds is that the products and systems offered by financial institutions often streamline customers. You've got a situation where a lot of business is being transacted online, and there are still individuals out there who would prefer to run their sort of finances in a different way. I actually enjoy perhaps going from place to place, maybe a local post office, these kind of things, and yet we're in an environment where perhaps those streamlined services have to be adhered to by individuals who might want to do transactions in a different way. The response to frontline staff is crucial according to the paper, and sufficient training is needed. And the Society of Later Life Advisors have a lot to say about this, as do others. The Council of Mortgage Lenders and others have set up a vulnerability task force where you can get some guidance on how to treat people and what frontline training is actually needed. How do you deal with somebody who's perhaps got hearing difficulties or mobility issues because you're now seeing them in later life as an advisor? How do you explain things simply to people who may have barriers in terms of cognitive ability? How do you make sure that's explained without missing anything? What about the presence of another family member? Does that need to be taken into account? And what are the implications in terms of confidentiality and so forth? All of these things need to be taken into account. Poor interactions or inflexible systems exist. Sort of the computer says no scenario. It was not that long ago, I suppose, where if you wanted to get a loan or take out a mortgage, sitting down face to face with somebody was perhaps the norm in the past, whereas again it's now a case of implementing rules and fitting into a set range of criteria, and perhaps that sort of flexibility to some degree has diminished a little. One of the key concerns is that if people do become vulnerable, even if it's for a temporary period of time, those customers may withdraw from the mainstream market if they cannot find a product or service which meets a particular need. For example, in the protection market, we have a plan whereby individuals who've perhaps been declined elsewhere for protection can still get the sorts of covers that are available to everybody else. And again, it's just looking further into the products that are available to help these clients with particular needs so they don't withdraw from those mainstream market products. However, one of the big ones is that consumers are often overwhelmed by complex information. Yes, in terms of the pension side of things, we have pension-wise, we have guidance there, we have access to advice, although, you know, clearly there is consideration now being given to pharma and how people might access complex information and get to the route that they might want to choose. But without that, consumers are overwhelmed by complex information. We have a very arguably complex pension system, even given the simplification that we've seen. And coupled with that, they can find it hard to distinguish between promotional material and important messages about their products. Have we seen this in the pensions environment? Do people understand the charging structure of products, what the implications are in terms of the what-ifs and maybes, in terms of how that product might help them into the future and the implications of sort of taking more income now rather than later, and so on and so forth. Are there any products out there which you find difficult to get under the bonnet of? Well, imagine the case for the scenario for the client and how that might be even more difficult if they're not receiving advice. Now, all this seems common sense. According to Martin Wheatley, the former chief of the FCA, what they're saying is this all builds on treating customers fairly. In fact, if you look at TCF outcome 4, where consumers receive advice, that the advice is suitable and takes account of their circumstances. You know, and their circumstances may be different from everybody else, particularly if they're going through a period of vulnerability. From a provider point of view, there are clearly some lessons for us as well. Whether it's a financial institution, a product provider, an advisor, those products and services that are offered need to be well designed, straightforward and understandable, and have a flexible service which responds to individual circumstances. And of course, meet needs over a lifetime, are flexible enough to change with clients' changing needs. One of the things when we look at retirement and vulnerable clients is just that understanding of how long a lifetime is and how client circumstances might change, and making sure that there are facilities available to meet changing needs. The big issue in terms of longevity, of course, and understanding how long retirement actually stands is the use of averages. And of course, using averages can be quite dangerous. For example, if you have a female age 65, on average, according to the stats, life expectancy is 24 years. But that is just an average. And here we get into the realms of mean, median, and modes. You said moans then? Modes. As you can see, 24 years is the average, but the chances of living beyond that average is 55%. The mode, of course, which is the most common date of death, or the most common age of end of longevity, is somewhat more lengthy than 24 years. And let's just put some perspective on all of this. It's great that there are taxation changes at age 75 on death benefits, but age 75, of course, is only 10 years into retirement for a lot of people if they've retired at 65. The idea that age 75 is elderly could be challenged, I would venture, as most individuals die after the age of 75. However, age 75 does seem a good place to have a bit of a specific advice review, not least of all because we do have this change in death benefits in retirement, whereby you've now got tax payable on any death benefits from crystallised funds if the individual dies after age 75. Marginal rates of tax, whether that's death benefits under an annuity or a drawdown scenario. Is it a case now of looking at the recipient's tax rate versus, for example, the tax rate for a bypass trust? You know, and do these things need to come back into the or come to the fore again? So there's one sort of very definite reason for reviewing clients at age 75. But here's the other one, again going back to vulnerable clients and particularly dealing with clients who are part of an ageing population. According to DP 16.1, financial numeracy and awareness of key financial terms and concepts reaches its peak at retirement age. In other words, all these phrases, all the jargon that we talk about, finally at retirement age, a lot of people have got a handle on it. They understand the financial terms at retirement. The downside is, as the paper goes on to say, it then declines steeply around age 75. So again, another reason for just reiterating to clients what they've actually got, what the plan is, and just making sure they understand exactly what their retirement portfolio looks like and what it's expected to do. And it's not just cognitive ability at age 75. Let's have a look at impaired and good health. The good news is that people are living longer, as we've already seen, but according to Age UK, a lot of that time is in a period of ill health, 7 to 9 years according to their report. And just look at where the line is on this. Age 75, whether it's physical, mental health, impaired health, comes in around about the age 75 area. So again, another reason for perhaps reviewing those client circumstances and seeing exactly what's changed. Is there a need for further income? Has their attitude to risk changed in light of their changing circumstances and so forth? So 75 is a very important age for lots of reasons. Maybe you could argue that in terms of cognition, it's not too much of an issue. If you look at this table here, we can see that even age 80 to 84, only 1 in 9 people will suffer some kind of dementia, according to the Alzheimer's Society. This is published in the Caslay document, When I'm 64. But of course, as time goes on, you get to 95 plus, we're looking at 1 in 2 individuals having some form of dementia, some cognitive challenge, as is worded here. Somebody mentioned to me recently that only about 1 in 4 individuals go into long-term care during their lifetime. The question with that is, and with this figure here, is do we know which ones they are? Because at 95 it could be 1 in 2 individuals. Well, you might say again, 95, that's quite elderly. Am I really going to have that many elderly clients? But again, looking at our longevity graph here, the answer potentially is yes. And so we need to make sure at outset that we've had considered what the needs of those individuals might be as they start to age, because they could well be clients of yours at that particular point in time. And it's very easy to underestimate life expectancy. We talked earlier about whether that had an impact on poverty and old age, underestimating life expectancy. But certainly it could affect the product choice if people have a misconception over how long an income needs to last. According to DP 16.1, underestimating life expectancy may affect the product choice, making annuity rates appear poorer value than they are. The ILC some time ago, and again backed up by some research that was backed by the FCA, point out that a lot of the issue with annuity rates isn't just necessarily the rate itself, but it's stretching out a fund, if you like, a purchase price, to provide a benefit over an increasingly longer period of time. Drawdown, on the other hand, again, you have this issue in terms of underestimating life expectancy. So both have their issues to contend with. Under drawdown, underestimating life expectancy may result in the person spending their savings too quickly. And I think we've seen that in other jurisdictions where drawdown sort of has become the norm. It's a very risky situation, and clearly just demonstrates the value of advice to make sure that client is on a sustainable level of income. So between age 75 and 95, lots of reasons why the advice may change. Health, we've talked about, cognition, death benefit tax, mortality cross subsidy. When you get to those older ages, for some individuals, is it now a chance to start looking into guaranteed type arrangements, particularly on the annuity side, where that mortality cross subsidy may mean that the income you can get may be difficult to achieve in the investment markets. And not only that, interest. At what point does the client say, well, okay, I'm no longer interested necessarily in these substantive products. We're now at a stage where, I want to, secure my income. Maybe not all of it. Maybe, earmarking some off to the family, the estate. passing money down the generation, but there's an element whereby, I need to make sure that my bottom line is covered. According to DB 16.1, turning pensions savings into retirement income is one of the most complex financial decisions, and one that most cannot afford to get wrong. I would suggest that nobody can afford to get it wrong. And yet the responsibility for deciding on pensions income and how that's generated is now down to the individual. According to the Treasury in July 2014, in the first sort of announcement of freedom and choice, we want people to be equipped and ready to make informed decisions. And in our other webinar looking at substituted decision makers, we'll have a look at what happens if the individual cannot make that decision by themselves. The good news is, as advisors, you are expert in dealing with not just the hard facts around finances, but the soft facts too, and recognizing when the advice pattern needs to change and the ongoing needs of individuals. So arguably, financial advisors are best placed to identify these particular issues and what needs to take place to ensure that that client can carry along their financial journey. From a provider perspective, yes, product solutions are there that can provide some sort of a platform to help with the solution, but we know that's not the starting point. But there is an onus on providers to make sure that plans are flexible, clear, well charged, and so forth. Some of the findings that we looked at in OP8 earlier. In our case, we're going down sort of the drawdown route and using that intellectual property of longevity within that to make sure that people have a bedrock of guaranteed income, but flexibility over and above that. And of course, the better rate you can get on the fixed element, the more you have to invest by spending less on that sort of annuity element. And we can do that within one product arrangement. So hopefully that's just given you a few things, a bit of food for thought on the vulnerable client scenario. It doesn't just apply to banks, financial institutions, it applies equally to product providers and indeed to financial advisors too. If you want more information on this, please look us up at partnership.co.uk or get in touch with your usual point of contact. And with that, I'll hand back to Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, for that, and we hope that you found that useful, and the webinar overall has provided you with some more information that can help improve the advice you deliver to your customers. If you have any feedback on this webinar or require any further information, then please contact Partnership directly, or alternatively contact NMBA by emailing us at events@nmba.info or calling us directly on 01484 439 200. On behalf of NMBA, I'd like to thank Martin and Partnership for supporting this session and sharing their expertise with us. Please look out for other NMBA webinars that will be available to you throughout the year. And thanks again for watching.